You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hi, you're listening to episode 18 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And this is part 2 of our discussion with Jessica Van Dong.
Hi.
So, in case you didn't join us for part 1, although I would very much recommend going back and having a listen, but just to recap, we have a bit of a difficult situation on our hands. Helsing Housing have called us in to help them with several burials found within their new development area. Each burial has vampire teeth found as a grave good within the inhumation. And we then have a fangless vampire requesting their teeth back. So this one might be a slightly difficult quest to complete because I can't really think of many vampires in the archaeological record that we can compare this with.
Well, we've kind of already mentioned that there are vampires in the historical record. But Tilly, did you know that there are actually vampires also in the archaeological record?
Wait, really?
Yeah. They're known as vampire burials, or should I say actually anti-vampire burials? Jess, you may know something more about this actually.
I know a tiny bit. I know that very limited. I'm going to mess up this pronunciation, so I apologize to any Polish listeners. Pien, Poland, there's a 17th century anti-vampire burial within a cemetery where a young woman was buried with a sickle around her neck, and there was another with a child's remains buried face down with a padlock around their ankle.
A padlock?
Yeah, presumably to keep them in the grave. Which is alarming.
Oh God. That is very alarming, isn't it?
Oh, God,
or maybe they lost the key.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Interesting.
But it's generally concluded that this cemetery overall was for anyone who was sort of rejected by society or had any reason, people had reason to fear them after death, but possibly in life as well.
Oh,
At least that is according to Dr. Darius Polinsky.
Oh, he was the researcher, wasn't he, at the actual dig?
Yes.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like there's some other archaeological ones that you can find where it's often like children or women that have something wrong with them in a way. So we talked a little bit. It's always way, isn't it? But it seems that there's a sickness or something in these cemeteries that's going on, and the archaeological evidence brings that out. And so you can see that there's one, probably the most famous one is the vampire of Lugnado in Italy, or even the vampire of Venice as well. So there's in the Lugnado in Italy, it's actually a child's graveyard. It's called the Cemetery of the Babies. And there's a 10-year-old child who was found buried next to like 5th century things, which is like Roman, I think. And it's a malaria graveyard. Oh. And the child was actually found with a stone inserted into its mouth. But it meant that, like, a lot of, you look at it, if I found that, I'd be like, well, maybe it just fell in there or something, maybe there was some animal burrowing or something and the stone somehow got in there. But actually, the positioning of the jaw meant that it was unlikely that it got there through decomposition. And there was even marks found on the cement of the stone that matched the child's teeth.
So
it's clear that it was put into the mouth, and it seemed likely that the child, they don't know the sex. I mean, it was very difficult to tell, especially for children. It's really difficult anyway.
Yeah.
That how they had a bad tooth abscess, which could possibly be caused by malaria, since it was in the cemetery as well. So
I have heard of other, like, I remember now. It's all coming back to me. Vampire burials at uni, and they always had like a big stone on their chest, or like, were face down, or had like some sort of tie. Also, not tie as in like a bow tie, but tie as in, like, because that would be a vampire. It's like their hands were tied, or something like that, and they were called vampire burials.
Or a brick in the jaw. Yeah, as like a method to like keep them from eating anything.
Oh, okay.
Well, eating themselves apparently as well.
Yeah, right.
According to that monk.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I guess that's the whole thing with being face down as well, because it's harder to get out. Like you start digging, and if you're trying to dig yourself out, you're more likely to just dig in front of you. So if you're face down, then you're less likely to dig yourself out. I don't know. Is that
That makes a certain sense.
Right?
If you're
you'd
trying to
probably
keep
be a bit
people in their graves.
discombobulated.
Yeah. I feel like you'd be a bit discombobulated anyway if you wake up and you're a vampire. You'd be like, what the?
I can't get out. I'm facing the wrong way. Oh, I'll just lie here then.
I'll just be here forever, conscious.
Forever and ever.
And I'm curious because we sort of already mentioned, you mentioned in the last episode, Jess, that kind of vampirism was associated with sort of consumption and all of this kind of thing. I mean, are there any other things? So like blood around the mouth or elongated fangs or something? Because I feel like there was something similar in Europe where it was associated with like the plague or other kinds of illnesses. I mean, are there other common illnesses from that time which could have also led to vampirism?
I mean, it really could have been anything. I mean, we were just talking about a malaria cemetery. I think any disease that would leave a person sort of debilitated over time and, waste away could be associated with like some sort of vampirism. I don't know specifically, but like even tuberculosis, there's a point at which, you're coughing up so much blood that there's always sort of a trickle of blood coming down from your mouth. So that's why that one specifically I know about, but especially with the osteological record, I mean, you're missing pieces, you're missing soft tissue. And so like, yeah, the abscess could be from a malaria outbreak. It could have just been a cavity. It could have been the kid chewed on rocks. I don't know. So like
that's why he had the rock in his mouth. Oh
my favorite rock.
Poor, what was the name? The Nicholas Darius Polinsky? No, that was a different one. That was another burial.
Oh yes, the P in Poland burial.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be anything really.
Yeah.
But I think there was a few myths that I've heard about, or sort of unidentified rumors that like hair will keep growing or fingernails will keep growing after death, and so people were like, this must mean that they're not actually dead.
Oh,
so it's really like a lack of an understanding about decomposition of a body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The explanation for the fingernails specifically is that, and teeth for that matter, is that the soft tissue loses its moisture in the desiccation process or the decomposition process. The hard tissues like the nails or the teeth sort of stay in place, but all the surrounding soft tissue sort of disappears or shrinks in on itself. And so it looks like things have gotten longer, but really they've just stayed in place while things around it got smaller.
So they've got thinner rather than longer, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, interesting.
And that's why they look like corpses, vampires, because they are corpses. Wow.
People in the past just had a very active imagination. I think we've established that.
Yes.
And it's quite interesting as well that these kind of vampire or anti-vampire burials, because it's, preventing the vampire from rising, are also kind of buried differently. So obviously they've got the brick in the mouth, or they've got a sickle over the neck, or they're facing downward. Sometimes they have a stone on their chest to keep them in place. And perhaps it's maybe a good time to point out to our listeners that as archaeologists, if we find a burial that doesn't quite fit the classifications of typical burials, especially when they're in a place or a landscape that has a more dogmatic ritual. Oh, sorry, I said the word.
Ritual.
Like in the medieval or post-medieval period, you always have to be buried a certain way. We actually call them deviant burials. So vampire burials to us are classified as deviant burials. They're different burials.
That is a good point. Which also though means that if you're reading an archaeological paper and you see that someone's saying, this deviant burial, you can think, it's a vampire. So, okay, it really is possible then to look at vampires as an archaeologist as well. It's not just history and folklore. There is archaeological evidence for archaeology. Well, luckily, we have with us Jess, who is a specialized forensic anthropologist and osteoarchaeologist. So she's an expert in looking at dead bodies. So maybe we can chat a little bit more about that. So you already mentioned this a little bit in the last episode of kind of the paleopathologies that you can see. So, you can see if someone was ill, for example, but like what else can you actually tell from just looking at the bones?
You can estimate age. With children, it's a lot easier because children's teeth, here we go with teeth, they erupt at sort of regular intervals. It's very standardized to within like a month, I think. I can't remember exactly
Is
what
it that close? Wow.
Yeah, no, it's really precise. And so, I mean, as they get older, I think it gets a little bit more vague, but there's certain like bones when they're growing, they start off as like multiple pieces of bone and then they slowly fuse together. And that fusion happens at different times also. And so up until about 27, that's when the last bone typically fuses, and it's the clavicle. So that's like the moment that like you start aging, as it were.
That's when it all 27.
Goes downhill.
Yeah, it does go downhill.
It's just broken bodies from that on.
Yeah, on the dot.
At 27, you start liking olives and you start to decrease your health.
Nap times become an obligation, not a choice.
Yeah.
Glasses, suddenly you can't see anything.
Okay.
But you can also,
age,
so you can tell age. You can estimate sex to a certain degree. Males tend to be more robust in their skeletal system. Females are more gracile, and so they're a little bit more delicate. But obviously, if you look around a room of people, there are, more gracile men, there are more robust females. And so that's not as like reliable of an estimation. And so, a recent discovery that I heard about was that they did an analysis of a samurai burial. Like there was a bunch of burials from this specific battle. And so they were like, oh, it must be all men. But then they did an osteological assessment and they discovered that most, in fact, were women. So I don't actually know what methods they used, but it was still really cool because we are maligned.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a strange story relating to gracile features. This is totally aside.
Speaking of gracile features,
my friend, when she gets, she's also an osteologist, and when she gets quite drunk, she likes to tell people what their features are like of their bone, like the facial structure. So she would just grab my face and be like, "You have such a gracile chin." I'd be like, "Thank you."
Your mandible. Wow.
Yeah. Gracile. Thank you.
That's
so
amazing.
you can tell that with skin on too, apparently. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, so like, one of my friends who's male, he has very like pronounced orbital ridges, so that like it's sort of like quote unquote like that Neanderthal look, which is like sort of like protruding forehead, like around the eyebrows.
Oh, right.
I bet he was happy with you when you said that.
Yes. Well, I don't drunkenly talk about people's facial features, but like there's certain people who see that and go, yes, a strong male must pursue, but then there's others who are like, oh no, I want actual like employment or,
Oh, like that gracile chin's not doing it for me.
Yeah,
like,
gracile chins. That's my thing. So it's not bad, but
yeah. So from your wealth of knowledge, how would you be able to tell if it's a vampire? Through teeth, maybe? Or how can we see how a person died? Can we see that on the bones?
To a certain degree. If it was like trauma, say, to just soft tissue and it didn't affect the bones at all, then you wouldn't be able to tell. If it was like, I know that there's been some burials where they found like arrowheads, like literally stuck in a rib.
You're like,
and it's like,
how did they die?
I wonder, right? Or there's like,
I think we need to call in an osteoarchaeologist for this one.
Oh, difficult.
Or like distinct signs of decapitation. That's going to show up on, your vertebra. But in terms of a vampire, I mean, it really depends on what like mythology we're following, and the sort of like Draculine myth. Like, do they or even in Buffy, do they turn into like a puff of smoke or like dust? And so then you wouldn't find any evidence of them, or are they more the like desiccated Vampire Diary ones, in which case you would see like, oh, they have like spare fangs hidden in their skull, or, you kind of have to imagine, are we talking about like, which fantasy realm are we in, and how do we process
But that's
that?
a good point, because
That's a good point, yeah.
they wouldn't have a skeleton, technically, if they die as a vampire.
So that means that the teeth in our burial were pulled
not belong to
when they were undead?
Well, if I remember the
Essentially?
scenario, wasn't the vampire whose teeth they belonged, or they were
Yeah.
his
He's
teeth?
still alive. That's
He's
true.
still alive. So
Which
they're his
seems like
teeth.
an odd trophy, honestly.
Well, these Van Helsings, you know what they're like. So they're his teeth, and they could possibly be vampire teeth.
Yeah. And well, I mean, like theoretically, if this vampire, claims that they're his, they would fit back in place. Maybe.
Oh,
Well, it depends on how
that'd be a good
how
test.
long he's been without his teeth, and does his skeleton keep growing, or like
Oh,
healing, or that kind of debate. I don't know.
oh my God, Tilly! I thought you dealt with our flying book problem. They're alive and kicking up dust around the finds trays.
Oh, for goodness sake, hang on. I'll just have a word with the book dragons. They're clearly not guarding them properly. We'll be right back, everyone. Hello, welcome back to And My Trowel. So the book dragons are on it now, so we can continue without interruption.
Oh, that's great. We paid them plenty of gold, so
Right.
fingers crossed we have it under control now. Anyway, where were we? Vampires! Yay! So, Jess, can you tell us a little bit more about the techniques you use on human burials, and do you think we can use the same ones to determine a vampire burial?
Well, to start off, do we think that vampires in this context continue growing the way we do as humans, i.e., like if you get a tooth pulled, your bone sort of fills in the gaps? Or do you think they're just sort of like as they are forever?
Well, I think in our live vampire who's come across on site is actually missing their fangs. So, no, they don't grow.
Which makes sense with the rest of mythology as well, right? Because they always remain like forever young. Like they remain the age that they...
Sorry.
That's actually also a part in, I just realised I haven't brought it into this episode yet, in Carpe Jogulum, which is one of my favourite of the Witches series, which involves vampires, and there's a family of vampires, which is very, very rare. And so they've got 2 kids. And then one of them at some point during the book is like, wait, hang on, why are you making all the decisions? He's like, because I'm head of the family, I'm the eldest. And he's like, but you're always going to be the eldest. Like, I'm always going to be a 12-year-old girl. Like, does this mean you're going to be the head of the family forever? And it's like, oh, yeah, that's the thing.
Well,
like,
that's like Interview with a Vampire. I can't remember her name now, but
Oh my God. Kirsten Dunst's character, but I can't remember her
Yes.
name either.
Oh, she's a vampire? I haven't seen it, I must say.
Well, it's not really a
God,
spoiler. It's
classic.
been out since like
Yeah, don't worry.
50 years now. But yeah, and it's also like the little vampire. You ever seen that? Where they turn the
One of my
cows.
favourite. Oh,
Yeah. So they've got children as well. And I don't think they age, which honestly, it sounds absolutely hell on earth to be
Right.
stuck in a 12-year-old body.
oh man,
Goodness
no,
me.
thank you.
I can be a perpetual
gangly.
12-year-old. Yeah. Yeah, no. Oof, that was so awkward.
But I wonder if you're like, because when you're younger, this is now going on a total rabbit hole, but because when you're younger, like, do vampires keep the same like hormonal things and stuff? Because obviously when you're younger, you don't have, I'm just thinking of my 2-year-old right now who has absolutely no empathy or like anything like that. Like if she would turn into a vampire, does that mean that as she grows up, in inverted commas, she'd still have that lack of empathy, or would she develop like difference in terms of like emotions and hormones and all of that kind of thing? Like, does that develop?
Well, that was touched on in Interview with a Vampire, because Kirsten Dunst's character is like 8 or something, and so still is like very selfish and it's just like, no, I want to do the things I want to do. And so their premise was that she was not going to change, and she was always going to be this little hell beast.
Right.
But then in theory,
But she learns. She has like, because she wants to be a woman, doesn't she?
yeah,
So she is like, she has the mind of a 100-year-old, whatever. but
But
the
emotional
hormonal
range
and
of a
yeah, of an
8-year-old.
8-year-old,
Oh gosh.
I think.
Yeah.
Right?
So like maybe you can learn the theory, but there's no like true
But it's
feeling
really
behind
difficult to put
it.
into practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just playing
And
a part.
I feel like in a lot of vampire lore, like if we're talking about fantasy, it is highly immoral for vampires, which is mad to think about, to turn children.
Right,
Yeah.
because
That's like the worst thing you could possibly do as a vampire.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, sorry, I took us down a bit of a rabbit hole there because, yes, that's talking about like the emotional or the like hormonal aging of a vampire, but what we want to know is whether they would actually physically age, because I guess that would depend what you could actually tell then. So you said that the vampire in our scenario didn't have newly grown teeth that had like regrown after the fangs had been taken out.
No, he seems to have no teeth or no fangs.
Okay. Do you think of like teeth? Okay. So now I'm going to just show my ignorance because I have no idea how teeth work. Like, I feel like they don't get bigger, do they? Do they grow? Can you like date a tooth?
So yes and no. I mean, the teeth start growing like in your jaw or like your upper jaw kind of thing. And then like the enamel part starts growing first, and then the root grows from that. And that's where like the teeth erupt from like your mouth as you're a baby, and then as a child when you get your permanent teeth. And then past that, they don't really grow technically. So you don't see any sort of like visible, like naked eye changes. But what you do see in microanalysis is if you cut a tooth root into a very tiny, thin slice and you look at it through a microscope, there are lines called cementum lines. And so it's the layer on the outside of the tooth root. And so then that you are adding layers theoretically every year, sort of like dendrochronology, where you can age a tree. But the problem is that these layers are very inconsistent. So it's very hard to be truly precise. In the research I did, I was very imprecise to the point where it was just not useful. There are people who have made this their career, which sounds like a nightmare to me.
We know nothing.
So, but for vampires, it would be interesting if, they did keep growing these layers, or if they stopped when they became a vampire. So like when they became undead, would that process stop?
Yeah.
And then in theory, if that was true, then maybe they're like tooth sockets. So in your scenario with this vampire wanting their teeth back, they could have a sort of empty tooth socket. And could you put them back in somehow? I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know.
And would they go like and just start growing again? Because that's the thing as well, at least in Terry Pratchett, where the vampire gets his head cut off, but in that one, you have to cut the head off and stake them through the heart as well. So if you just cut the head off, you can technically just plop the head back on. So
yeah, that's in a lot of the myths, isn't it? Where they can like reattach limbs. And I hate to be the one that brings up Twilight again, but I think even that they're like stone, and if you reassemble them, they will be alive or dead again.
Yeah, they're
so
sort of.
If you had the teeth and popped them in, and they just sort of the roots went and like regrew again.
Yeah, the connective tissues just like reanimate. Or just some super glue.
But does that mean that would mean though then that the teeth, right? Yeah. But that would mean that the teeth would have to, because when a tooth, so I assume that it only creates these layers that you're talking about, Jess, when they're in the mouth. But if you would take a tooth out, it doesn't create, like it dies at that point.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So ultimately, I think the tooth would die when you pull it out. And then in the context of a vampire, perhaps the tooth dies when they become a vampire and become undead, because theoretically they are dead.
But so, because I guess the other side of it would be, though, if we've already established that like emotional and skeletal and all of that kind of stuff stops growing when a vampire is made into a vampire, then logically the teeth also would be dead. So they wouldn't also age either. So I guess, yeah, immortality would kind of screw up the results of any analysis that you might make in this case, right, Jess?
Exactly.
So if we're then looking at it in terms of kind of dead teeth, that have been extracted from a vampire, are they, bear with me, still then part of the vampire? Or because they're kind of object, I mean, this is getting into the whole human remains versus objects issue as well. Like,
Yeah,
if they're
definitely.
bones, like necklace made from human bones, is that still human remains, or is that classified as an object? Like, yeah.
But then the vampire is still alive. Okay? So
Yeah.
like it's not separated by time because the vampire is still present and is literally on site saying, I think they're my teeth. I want them back.
So
So is it different?
what do you think, Jess?
Well, I would consider the vampire as the living dead would have rights over their own teeth because A, they belong to them, but also one could consider them the vampire's burial goods as the original possessor of the teeth, whereas the vampire hunter stole the teeth. And so then the vampire hunter would have to repatriate the teeth to the vampire. I think that's how it would roll.
I think that sounds fair.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Ash?
Yeah, I think that sounds absolutely fair. I think they don't even have to put a repatriation request in. I think really the Van Helsing people should give their teeth back.
It's pretty clear. You can literally, if he can literally point at the gap in his gums and be like, look, like, here it is.
Those are mine.
It goes there.
I mean, so yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that would be easy. That would be an easy check as well, as Jess pointed out earlier, if you could actually slot the tooth back into the vampire's mouth and be like, yep, okay, cool, these are your teeth.
So interestingly, the solution to this problem is not archaeological
At all.
at all. It's literally a puzzle piece.
But I guess we could also, if we wanted to be fancy about it, we could ask Jess to find out how old the teeth are and then ask the vampire how old he was when he died. And if that matches up, then they could also be his teeth.
I also have a bit of an archaeology question with teeth because obviously we do isotope analysis on teeth. How would that work with vampire teeth? I'm genuinely just curious about this. Would it be the same?
I think it would be because, I mean, theoretically, it would just, they would gain nutrients from where they grew up before they became a vampire. And then as they're consuming other people's blood, surely their isotope stuff would be somehow involved in their blood potential.
That would be so confusing. Yeah.
There's a lot of layers.
And then could
to
you
this.
pinpoint the victims of a vampire then? Where they grew up potentially?
But then how would you know if it's where the vampire grew up or where the person who they've been feasting on recently grew up?
Right. I feel like you'd have to do like stomach content analysis as opposed to like, I don't know, like hair follicle or teeth analysis. Yeah.
Oh. Well, which also, I guess hair doesn't grow either on vampires.
I guess so.
Well,
That feels awkward to me.
Well, I apologize for bringing you in, Jess, because it seems like we didn't actually need your skills of analysis at all, even though you're extremely skilled in what you do. We like Jess said, we just had a puzzle piece.
I'm
just a
offended.
jigsaw.
Well, what's interesting is that, so as an art conservator now, working in a museum, I work more with like repatriation comes up a lot in like museum conversations. So it's an interesting alignment of my degrees, as it were, and work experience. So it hasn't been totally futile.
There you go. See, we did it just for you, Jess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
There
It was
you
like
go.
it was curated or something.
What?
Well, that's pretty fantastic then. So our scenario is finished, is done. What we do is we go up to the vampire in question, we invite him on site, get him a hard hat, get him some high vis. It's really clean. We know he's a newbie. And we take him over to the burial. We clean off a bit of it, of the teeth. We record it beforehand,
Of course,
remember?
always record it.
Record it, take photos, post-ex, whatever. And then we give him the teeth and he slots them back into his gums, and you hear the
as the roots just
together. And he goes, oh, thank God, I can finally eat. I don't have to use a straw anymore.
He takes out the plastic vampire teeth from his pocket.
The ones that glow in the dark.
Yeah.
Thank God. I will miss them at the raves, though.
There was an X-Files episode about that.
Oh, yeah. If we find some plastic vampire teeth in another burial, we'll know what's happened.
Exactly.
But that's brilliant. So thank you so much, Jess, for joining us. But before we go, do you have anything that you'd like to share with our listeners? Perhaps there's some exciting projects that are coming up or any future plans for you?
There's not too many. Me and my supervisor, Mimi Levesque, she works on mummies. And so I'm hoping to do more of those kind of projects in the art conservation world. But other than that, life continues.
just working on becoming Amelia Peabody.
Oh my God, yes. The dream.
Well, I think if we ever bump into a mummy, we're going to have to get you back on.
Yes, yeah, for another episode.
Yeah,
in the
if
future.
any of those crop up, calling Brendan Fraser.
I'll let you know. I'll keep your details on file just in case.
A little handy jotter.
Well, that's about it for this episode of And My Trowel. We hope that you enjoyed this quest. Thank you so much, Jess, for coming, even though, as we said, we didn't really end up needing all of the information that you gave us.
Thanks for having me on.
It was still great to have you here and to discuss things. Yeah, we've learned a lot, so thank you for coming. And in the meantime, as always, we're always looking for new episode ideas. We've already got a couple today. Definitely need to do an episode on mummies, apparently. So if you have any suggestions, do get in contact via email or social media. All of our contact info can be found in the show notes. And you can also find in the show notes all of the studies and interesting examples of vampire burials that we spoke about today. So do go check them out.
Tilly, not to alarm you, but don't turn around.
Oh, God, why?
Just something very big just slithered out of that lake behind you.
Oh, yeah, you're right, Ash. That's not at all alarming.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.